Okay, I think we're ready to begin. I just wanted to point out a few things to you before we start. This is a floral I had seen at a doctor's office, and it was on a counter, so I took some pictures and I came up with this watercolor. I liked it because it had a rose, it had some hydrangea, and it also has some open flowers as well. The background is nice and soft and diffused. We'll work on doing that with some really watercolory washes. And the vase was kind of white, so I just went in with some colors that are in the palette as reflections. And it has a little reflection or a shadow under it from the table. And before we start, I'm going to talk a little bit about the watercolor medium. For those of you who haven't done a watercolor before, I put my paint in there, and this is the watercolor medium. This is Global Art watercolor medium. This is an acrylic that's put into this little, this is a 10 well watercolor palette. I like working with these because I can put out 10 colors and I know they're fresh and nice. But I also use a dry palette, which it has dried and I reconstitute it later with water. I just spray with my little water bottle and give my paints a spritzing before I start painting. After you put the medium in, your watercolor medium in, I put a few drops in. Okay, then I take the back end of my brush and I start stirring. And I stir and stir and stir. The main thing about changing these paints into a watercolor is that if you thought about a jar with ping pong balls, this liquid goes in and you want to keep stirring it until the liquid surrounds or encapsulates each one of those little ping pong balls are a little molecule. So you want to make sure that you have a good amount of your medium in there and stir and stir. The big key is stirring well before you start. So I'll then put all my colors. I'm not going to do that all now, but I just wanted to show you that you really need to stir this puddle very well before you start. So I'll just put that aside for now, and I have already set up my palette with all that stirring done so that we're ready to begin painting. We are also, I wanted to show you, this is just a piece of foam core board. It has my watercolor, 140-pound watercolor board, and I use masking tape. I don't like the blue tape. I think masking tape does a better job. And you say, well, why do we need to tape this down? It keeps the papers flat. When the paint dries, the water dries out of here, it will return to this shape. And you get a really nice, and I'm just going to show you. Here's another watercolor I was working on. You get a really nice white edge. Because I have the watercolor edging, the masking edging, see that nice little frame it puts on there? Then if you put it in a plastic sleeve, here's another one with my white edge, and I think it just frames the work. So then if you want to just put it in a plastic sleeve, put a piece of the white corrugated cardboard the same size, then you have it ready. You can mat it. But it's in a plastic, so it's protected. No finger marks can get on your paper or on your mat. But you don't have to mat them when you give them as a gift. You can always just give them the painting on the cardboard in a sleeve and let them do the framing and matting themselves, because there's color choices involved and everybody has a different point of view. I've got my watercolor brushes out. I like to use Low Cornell's Ultra Round. They're nice pointed round brushes, and they hold a nice amount of water. So now before we start, we have to do something called masking. And masking is so that we don't lose the white of the paper. I put masking on these hydrangea so that they would retain a highlight. I put masking on my rose to be sure that after I put all my shading in, let's tighten this up a little bit so you can see. So when you put your shading in, you're not going to lose this white of the paper. I have an edge here with just a little bit of a fold. I have some spots here that I just wanted to make sure I kept a little extra bright white in some of the flowers, the centers, a couple of dots here. And if you don't put the masking and you aren't thinking and you just start painting, you've lost your white of your paper. I think I could have put a little bit here on this glass vase, so I might do that on this one so that you can see. Now we're going to do the masking together. I'm just using an old brush. It's a round. For tiny, tiny dots, I can use a toothpick. I'm going to take my, I've used a couple of these now. I haven't tried every brand on the market, so you'll have to experiment. This is Richardson. This is called Liquid Mask, and it's a pink tone. I don't know if you can see that. It's just a little bit darker than the white of your paper, so you can see where you've put the mask. I've used Winsor Newton has a white mask. I believe they also have either a yellow or some of them are tinted. Now I just put it in my little cup. It's my little salt dish from Mom's China set. I love to use those. They look so pretty. It's easy to wipe out when you're finished. Now the mask reminds me, if you remember going back into grade school, they gave you rubber cement. Do you remember how rubbery that was? Well, this is kind of like that. That when it starts to dry, you can roll it around and you can make it into little balls. And you can see I just dropped some on from my fingers. And it brushes away. The idea is to put a little bit of mask. And we're not using a lot. It dries very quickly. I'm just going to find some of my flower areas. Let's get in a little tighter so you can see. Okay, I'll put some on this rose. I want the top portion of the petal to retain a little bit of white. And I'm so apt to maybe lose that white. So I'm going to, maybe the tips, you can hit a couple tips. Put a couple strokes in. Put some definitely in front of the cup of the rose, the bowl. Maybe some of my daisy petals. This is up to you where you would like to see a little bit of glint. Maybe a little bit on this blue flower. Some of my flower centers I'm going to dabble. I don't like polka dots, so a lot of my dots get joined, but they'll be bright. Now, if you end up putting too much, can you paint it out? Yes, you absolutely can. When we remove this, if you go, oh my gosh, I got carried away here, then you can just take a little bit of watercolor and we can paint it out. Okay, now on these, on the hydrangea, I made kind of long, sketchy strokes. You might want to form a little bit more petally look. That's okay too. I'm going to do a little bit of a different look on this one. I'm going to dab it with a little broader stroke. I'm staying in my highlight area. We will have a shadow next to the flowers, but I'm going to dab a few strokes, and then over here I get a few less. The light will catch an edge maybe. Where else did I put it? Let's see. I put it on this one. a little bit broader strokes, not such skinny lines. I think it would be a little bit more like a hydrangea if we... I don't want to form every petal because then it's a little too planned. Now down below, I'm going to put a dash for my highlight here. Just a swoosh. And I might put a little bit, I always like a little bit of a highlight on the very bottom and a little bit on the side of the, right here, and that little dash on here. And I think that's about all of the white that we need to preserve. That's just to keep our white of the paper and we don't lose it. Because it's easy. Once you start painting, oops, I just painted where I shouldn't have. And then you're stuck. Now, before I started, I forgot to tell you that if you put this masking on your brush, it is like glue. It sticks. So before you start painting on the mask, I dress my brush in a liquid soap. I use my dishwashing soap and put it all over the bristles, and then I start dipping it into the mask. And that's just something I've always done because I want to make sure that I can get my brush clean again. So when you rinse it out, all the mask comes out and all the soap comes out as well. So you're not ruining a brush. Okay. Now I've got my line drawing on. I'm sure you have your drawing on as well. Let's go back out so you can see the whole picture. And I've centered this. It has a little bit of space for my table and a little bit up top. I brought it up just a little higher. A little bit of top, up at the top of the flowers. There's a little air space up here. So that's where I put it, and I centered it. All right, well, we can begin painting some of our flowers. Thank you for all your comments and questions. I do appreciate your emails, and I love seeing what you do. Several of you have sent me your pictures, your finished paintings. I love seeing it, and I will critique them if you would like some of that to happen. Now I'm just checking. This should be dry, so we should be all right to start. My white flower, let me pull that back over again. Here you can see we've shadowed this one and left the light edge, and it's light on either side. So it really looks like the petal has cupped upwards. So we're gonna do that with our white flowers. But we're gonna work on some leaves, and we'll have some tight shaped leaves, and we'll also have some very loose and sheer leaves as well. So let's take out our pine green. And pine green is a little bright for me. I'm going to add just a little bit of burnt umber to this. Just a little bit. I don't want my leaves too dark, so it's minuscule. Okay. And I make a nice puddle with water on my palette. Excuse my messy palette. I keep all my dried paints in there. Okay, now we're going to go in and we're going to find some of our leaf areas. Okay, we have a sword-shaped leaf up here. Oh, and be sure you put your pattern on nice and light. That's why it's hard to see it. This is a wet brush, and I'm putting in some of my greens. You can also elevate. I use some of my little paint cups to elevate my board so it runs a little bit. That also gives a nice look. And I'm going to work on that leaf, and then I'll move on to another leaf. Let's see if we can pull that in for you. Ooh, we can really pull it in. Okay, I've got my leaf wet, and I'm going to drop in. We have phthalo blue on our palette, which is a very dark blue. So I take a little corner of my green and mix it with phthalo, and I'm going to get a darker green. I use dark, mediums, and lights. And I'm going to drop in some dark shading at the base of this. Now we want this will run a little bit inside the leaf. Wherever it's wet, the paint can run. If it's a dry surface, it won't go anywhere. Also, I like to, while I'm working on that particular leaf, I like to have a tissue on hand, of course. I'm going to have to run and grab my tissues. They moved. Okay. Sorry about that. A tissue is handy with watercolor because you can go in and you can just take a little tissue and highlight an area if you like. So we're going to make that area a little bit lighter. Put a little dark shadow below it, and you can see how the water is carrying the paint. Now if it's not carrying it to where I want it, that's when I just help it a little bit and I move it. Okay, we have a cluster in the center here. I'm going to start out with my light, that light mix. I'm going to put, now we can't see this because it's kind of behind some of the flowers, so we're going around the petals. Okay, I just paint that in, very simple. Okay, if you get too much water, just touch your paper towel, sop it up a little bit. Alright, now that's a nice little shape in there. Now, what I like to do is rinse my brush, pat it on a paper towel, and soften the edge. See how wispy that gets? And that tells the viewer, well, we can't really see it so good. It's kind of diffused. Then I'm going to drop in some of those darks because down in these crevices here by the flowers, it's going to be darker. And we can put a stroke or two to make it resemble maybe a leaf back there. Okay, oh, there's another cluster like that right in here. Lay in a little color. I push it out. Maybe I'll give that flower a little stem just because I feel like it. There's some greenery going on in here. Now this videotape is going to end, so I'm going to pick up in 1 minute. I'll be right back.